minute, did everybody get a chance to sign in outside? They have a police signature come in the door, and then also for somebody online, just go to the chat feature and just check in if you don't catch your name signing in. Also, just be advised that this event on Teams, so we can follow up on any other questions that if you try to stump us, we've got the answer. We'll follow up with you on the next meeting. So we've got a lot of experts in the room. So today, right, Uber services in the house. So, in the news topic right now, and anytime we have such an event that happens in the world or in the country, we try to look at our own plans in the city of Norfolk and see how our plans are relevant to the act. Sure that we're not missing something that happened in the real world that they experienced, so we can make our plans better and more complete. So Jim Reddick, which is the Director of Emergency Preparedness and Response, took on this task because one, he's from Ohio and he hit close to home with a train derailment. Two, he's into preparedness and we've got tracks all around. And it's like, here's our hazardous plans, not just for trains, but hazardous materials all over. So he undertook this and we thought it was relevant to bring it to the LEPC. So this is going to be a two-part. So I'm going to let Jim go ahead and we'll tackle it as best we can.
Thanks, Scott. I don't know about fun-filled 2 hours, but it's certainly, I think, going to be a really good conversation. Like Scott said, whenever anything happens throughout the nation or the world, not just in Ohio, we try to take the opportunity to balance. And so the East Palestine really opened our eyes, prompted us to really look and see what our hazmat plans are. Not so much for the tactical response. Fire rescue has that down. VDEM has that down. DEQ, EPA, they know what they're doing. And as emergency manager, we need to have it. Because we'll be asked by our council members, we've been asked by the community what the plan is and everything else. So among all the different competing priorities, it just makes sense to really watch and observe and learn the lessons that are being taught by real events, East Palestine being one of them. This is not a conversation about East Palestine. This is not a judgment of East Palestine. It's really kind of taking some of the lessons that we observed, applying them to our plan, and having a conversation so we all know what that plan says and what the realistic expectations are or should be. So again, we just have one more annex that is really comprehensive and we can respond as Team Norfolk responds. Just so we know who all's in the room, I'd like to go around just so we can see the subject matter experts and also thanks to my team who are going to be documenting all the notes so we can update based on today's conversation. So Daniel, you want to start?
Yes. Good afternoon, everybody. Mike Thomas, Lieutenant Police Woman. Yes, safety specialist. Eric, that's not officer.
Area, I'm the Tidewater the prep manager for
Else, action, fire marshal.
Afternoon, Kelly Strauss, Assistant Director of Communications.
Everton, sir. Online, Cheryl Simpson, you want to introduce yourself? Cheryl, can you hear us? All right, we'll move down to Sarah Poole.
Daniel, this is Kim. It's breaking up a bit, but it may straighten up now that you've turned off your video. Sometimes that steals the bandwidth, but
Go ahead, Kim, since you have the floor, you want to introduce yourself?
hi everybody, it's Kim Tempesco from Centera.
Lauren? DEQ?
Hi, this is Lauren Pillow with the Virginia DEQ Pollution Response Program.
Cheryl Simpson from the Independent Center? Right. Chief Paquette from Norfolk Fire Rescue? And Sarah Fuller from Community Services Board.
Hi, Sarah Page Fuller, Community Services Board.
Thanks, Sarah.
And Kathleen Chancellor just joined us as well.
Hi there, Kathy Chancellor, Risk Management.
Well, I think
Thanks, Kathy. All right, go ahead and minimize if you don't mind. So really, we're just kind of know which button it is. Oops.
It was.
All right, so when you look at the continuum for a response to a chemical incident, we already had fire rescue present to us a few months ago, right? So we talked about what the purpose of an LEPC is for, the fact that we have facilities throughout the entire community and transportation systems on which they rely to transport the ethyl methyl death, wherever it's going to go in whatever quantities. So again, the EPCRA, Emergency Preparedness Community Right to Know Act, is what mandates us to make that information available to the public, so they know what chemicals is in their own community. And they say evacuation routes, which to me, there is no defined evacuation route, because it's going to kind of depend on the plume at the time. But certainly what evacuation looks like, or shelter in place. And I think we'll get the shelter in place later on when it comes to messaging, because I think a lot of folks don't know what that means. Is it the right one? So historically speaking, these are where facilities with chemicals have been throughout the community, at least in reportable quantities. I won't say that that's what the picture looks like now. It's just to show you that they are pretty much spread throughout the entire community. And then since the biggest issue has been rail, we see what the rail tracks are for Norfolk Southern as well as CSX. CSX, really, to my surprise, they just have a small slither coming right outside of the port. And Norfolk Southern has a lot more, not only primary lanes, but also partner lanes as well. FEMA just did a community survey last year on different perceptions of threats, what folks are or are not doing to be prepared for various hazards, and a chemical emergency. And they found pretty quickly that 70% of the folks are not prepared for a chemical emergency. I'd venture to say that's an underestimate, but 1/3 folks felt that they had the information they needed on which to be prepared during such an event. But like we've seen in East Palestine, they are probably more often than not a no-notice incident. And so while they think they might have the ability to get prepared, it might be too late. So I think there's a lack of awareness of what a chemical threat is compared to people understanding what a tornado hazard is, what a hurricane hazard is. There's an element of confusion regarding chemicals. A lot of folks don't necessarily know what the symptoms are if they've been impacted by a chemical incident. And like I said, by and large, a lot of folks we can expect in our community would not be prepared or know exactly what to do in the case of Kelly sending out a message saying shelter in place. A lot about them. Again, this was an education opportunity for me. So I learned a lot more about CERCLA, the Clean Water Act and the Oil Pollution Act. And my understanding, and I'll look to you guys, because I'm speaking your language now, that the National Contingency Plan, right? So the National Contingency Plan kind of outlines the federal government's response to oil and chemical chemical responses. I also mentioned the EPCRA, the Emergency Preparedness Community Right to Know Act. And then on the emergency management side, should it get to the level of FEMA's involvement, then they would also enact the National Response Framework, which incorporates emergency support functions and the oil and chemical hazard specific annex. We're going to go over all of this, right? So we're going to start with boom, going to 911, but then kind of talk about how the incident evolves. Who the players are, what their focus and concentrations are, and then how it expands to really a Stafford Act incident. If there's any questions along the way, please raise your hand. This is an informal conversation, and I hope it'll be something that we all wish. But since I mentioned some of the laws, the EQ, do you want to say anything before we get started? I don't want to put you on the spot either.
I think you covered it really well. Just from our perspective, you know, the EPCRA is run out of our central office. So the program there that tracks all of the reporting that you showed on the map, that's a central office function for us. So if anybody has questions about that sort of thing, it wouldn't necessarily be us, but we know the people to get you to. So just that you kind of know where the experts are for that division of labor.
Awesome, thank you. And if you don't remember, or you weren't here for the fire marshal's presentation, those chemical facilities or facilities that have a certain amount of chemical in them, they have to report to the head of the LEPC and the fire department. And a lot of places they're one and the same, but they get the reports, we get the reports, the fire chief gets the reports. I mean, so these facilities are submitting this information. So the responders to those facilities should know what they're going to be getting into. So thank you for that. All right. One thing about railroads, while we have the information on facilities, to my knowledge, and I having a conversation with the state, we don't have to be notified of when we have a commodity flow study, which talks about what types of chemicals would be transported on the highways or rail, but not the when. It would be in a reactionary standpoint should something happen, because we don't necessarily know when certain chemicals are going to come through. Now, I did learn yesterday from Mike Rose that a lot of the more toxic substances come at night, right? Because, during the idea being, the roads are less populated and things like that. But I can tell you, and we'll kind of get through, that also brings some additional challenges as well. So an incident occurs, and hopefully someone's going to call 911, right? So they see a derailment or whatever. And I do want to say that a derailment here in Norfolk should be pretty rare, because we know that as we've waited for them, the trains move pretty slowly, right? So they go a lot faster in places like Ohio in the more rural sections. So if something happens of a derailment here, then there is either some kind of horrible mechanical failure or something more nefarious, and certainly our law enforcement partners would be involved with the investigation. But an incident occurs, a call goes into 911, 911 manager, Diane McDermott, how would your folks respond to that type of call?
We would process it as normal, excuse me. Obviously, the location, what was involved, not only what, but things of that nature. You know, we would ask for placards, if it's already, you know, leaking of that kind of thing. And we would be, depending on time of day, it would probably be more than one call. We would be inundated with several calls. And that information would be updated and passed on to our field responders for them to have. If we're given placard numbers, we would look into the emergency response guide or the ERG. We would try to get some basic information just so we can pass it on to field personnel when they're on the way on, you know, this is what we think it is, this is what we're told it is. And based on what we're seeing, these are some of the actions that we're advising our citizens to do.
Gotcha. Awesome. Now, I don't want to assume everybody knows what a placard is. Do you mind explaining what a placard is?
So it's the little square that's kind of in a triangle shape that's offset, and it will have a series of 4 numbers, and it may have some symbology with it, whether it's like my big word, you know, whether it's got, you know, the little broken, looks like flare with some stuff coming off of it and let us know that it might be caustic type of material. But in that placard, there is a series of 4 numbers. That translates out to a paper book, or you can get it online. And then it will say any kind of precautions we need to take is don't put water on it. If the wind is going this direction, how far away you need to be, any, you know, PPE protected clothing for field personnel, things of that nature. So that's the kind of stuff. For Kelly's team, if it says they need to shelter in place, if they need to evacuate, that's some of the very early information that we would have, again, based on what citizens are telling us.
Awesome. Thanks, Diane. So who is usually the first agency to respond to any incident? Police, right? So, I mean, I could ask you guys to guess. Hopefully we get that placard information and that could be relayed to police, right? So, you know, before offline about the availability of PPE that may or may not be in your squad cars and stuff like that. But what steps could be taken for your officers so they're safe on scene? But what would your focus be just going into the event?
If we have an idea that it's a chemical issue, we just wait. We're going
Good.
to
Okay.
back off and wait. Like if we have a thought that a chlorine truck has crashed, we're not going to get that thing. We're going to wait for the fire department to let us know.
Gotcha.
You know, when it's clear, because we don't have the PPE that.
Okay, no, that's good to know. I mean, because in my nightmares, I mean, police are always responding before we even know what the hazard might be.
Right.
And then, you know,
Well,
there's,
that's the issue is if we were to respond, not knowing.
right,
You know?
yeah,
And then, of course, you have young officers who may not necessarily know what to do, even though they've been trained to get and then go, you know, scenario. And, you know, so that would become an.
all right, what's your focus when you're arriving on scene?
Life safety. So
Okay.
our first priority is going to be parties involved in the incident themselves with the surrounding area. And then much like PD, if we have no idea what it is, there's a tank truck laying on its side, we would stop quite a distance away, binoculars, and try and identify what it was. But always life safety would be our first priority,
Okay.
whether it be the person involved in the incident or the
Responsible parties, right? So in the case of Ohio, that's Norfolk Southern. It's whoever owns that rail, that transport, they are the responsible party. And they are supposed to report incidents where there's a release of, you know, oil, chemical, whatever it is. Does that always happen? Does the responsible party always report? Let's just assume they don't, all right? And I'm not saying that's, again, this is not Ohio, and I'm sure they did, whatever. I'm just saying that there's ways that folks are communicated of an incident. So the responsible party should be reporting it to the National Response Center, right? And at the same time, fire and rescue will notify the National Response Center just in case, right? A trust, but verify. And so once that's done, once the National Response Center has enough information for the EPA or the Coast Guard to make a decision, and again, EPA for on land, Coast Guard on water, right?
Well, not exactly.
Okay, please tell me more.
That side of the James River being going west is primarily EPA, correct?
Yes.
Whether it's on land or in the water.
Okay,
On the land?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Potential to discharge,
okay,
so into a navigable waterway, this Coast Guard. And that also gets, a little hairy at times too, because we learned recently as well that for tank facilities, so it wouldn't be the case in this scenario, but for tank facilities, those are under EPA's jurisdiction, even if they are all the way to the coast. So
okay.
for the most part, you can rely on, that's right, it said, Coast Guard, essentially this side of the James River.
Okay, awesome, thank you. Okay, and so they will make that determination if federal resources should be brought to bear, in which case there would be a federal on-scene coordinator, right? So fire rescue is still gonna do what they're gonna do, but the Coast Guard would determine if there is gonna be federal oversight and more federal resources to be brought to bear. So as I learned reading through the oil and chemical incident annex, there are 4 response constructs. And again, please tell me if I'm wrong. One is, well, we'll just go through each one of these. But if you're like me and need help with acronyms, you're going to see SLTT, which we are very familiar with in emergency management. That just stands for state, local, territorial, and tribal territories. RP, I've already and then federal departments and agencies. But if there are any acronyms that you see that I've not explained, please let me know, and we'll try to make sure that we explain them, because we otherwise try to prevent acronyms altogether. So in that initial response, police and fire are on scene, right? And the National Response Center should be notified at some point soon. DEQ, I remember talking with Ray, and he said that VDEM typically responds with DEQ. So Ray, if I'm not mistaken, you're notified by the fire rescue folks of an incident. Is that right? Or how is that
So
connected?
there's several pathways that this can happen.
Okay,
Certainly, if the fire department hazmat team get it's on PD, depending on where the jurisdiction is, they make call me. In other cases, there's a pathway to go to Richmond, to the Emergency Operations Center, to our watch center, and they will call in there, and one of our telecommunicators will ask them a series of questions. What's the chemical? What's the quantity? What's the problem? Are there any waterways potentially impacted? And then that gets sent to me through a page and email, and I'm immediately alerted that that is happening. And then, and they will be the same. If it's an event that requires a immediate notification, somebody from DEQ also gets alerted at the same time, and we will get that first initial notification. And also, if it comes from the fire department, even before I talk to DEQ, I'm going to talk to whoever made the call from the fire department and say, hey, what do you got? What's going on, and how can I help you? And we go from there with.
So Nick and Mike, if I'm not mistaken, you guys deal with every incidents every day, certainly every week, right? That don't reach the level of DEQ involvement or VDEM involvement. Is that safe to say?
Correct. That's what I was going to feedback with what Ray said. A lot of times he'll get notified of something because it goes to the state. He'll call us and say, hey, can you go check on somebody put 5 gallons of paint in the drain or some small incident? The larger incidents like we talk about typically it would go the other way. They would probably be notified at the same time we are through somebody to call Richmond or whatever. But the day-to-day things, I can't tell you how many times Ray will call, someone will call state or have an issue, a small issue, that, yeah, we deal with, or an engine company will go out and take care of on a daily, if not weekly basis.
Okay.
The smaller types.
And that's
Okay.
that's our C pathway.
Yes.
Because back in the day when we had phone books, there was a number in the front of the phone book, an 800 number, and it would take you to the NRC, which is the National Response Center. And it said, if you have a pollution incident, call this number.
Mhm.
And so it trickles back down that way. So calling the NRC doesn't send the federal, it comes to the state, and then by way of me to the locality, because the localities don't get NRC reports directly, but I will review it and look and say, okay, this rises to the level that I need to tell somebody locality. I probably don't need to go out and look at
I think, like you said, I mean, this probably happens more than we even think it does.
Oh,
daily.
Yeah,
yeah.
okay. Is mentioned because they're aware of it, but they're not necessarily engaged because they don't need to be, because it's handled at the level of how we are resourced here in Norfolk. Gary, do you have a question?
Yes. Love all the interactive dialogue. When do we notify critical infrastructure crews?
Oh, we're getting there. We're getting there.
Okay.
So right now, this is just spills, like paint spills, gas, whatever it is. It's pretty much addressed. It's cleaned up. And to make the point, once it's cleaned up, the bill is handed to the responsible party. Am I right? So whoever is at fault for the incident, they're the ones who pay the cleanup costs and all that stuff. Is that?
We try to do that.
Right.
We try to do that.
Right.
Sometimes you're not found, sometimes it takes a little investigating, sometimes.
Gotcha.
But
Okay.
in theory, yeah.
Right. Now, going back to what Diane was talking about earlier, when you crack open the emergency response guide and look up whatever number is on that placard, that's what it tells you. The potential hazards, public safety considerations, and evacuation distances, right? So again, what you see right there is what they used in Ohio. And so when you wonder how they came up with a determination of a 1 mile evacuation radius, it's that right there. It's because there was a fire involved or was going to be involved, through an explosion. And so the guide says a 1 mile radius. That's how I interpret it. I mean, the information is right in there. And so again, just to recap, law enforcement, if you don't have the placard information already and you're on scene, hopefully that's being reported to the EOC with a quickness. And so you folks will know exactly what you're coming on. Dr. Thomas, you have the PPE to put on, right? And then keep unauthorized personnel away once you're there setting up that perimeter. You guys are focused on containment. One thing that we didn't necessarily see in Ohio was patients. There were no patients to transport. There were no, as far as I'm aware, no injuries or fatalities. But that's certainly something that could come prevents that. And I don't even want to know right now if that's in the incident. Thank you, sir. Plume modeling. So they're going to look at the weather. Fire and rescue is going to look at the weather, determine the direction and the speed of the winds to determine, how that chemical is going to travel, where it's going to go, and really kind of use that information on, whether or where to do some evacuations. Certainly notify the hazmat team, Ray and company, of whatever additional resources they might need, and notify the responsible party if they're not already notified, and then monitor the air quality. And then there's things that we can do in the EOC in support of. So once we realize, and we'll probably hear from Diane and her team first, that this is a pretty bad chemical, we're going to start looking at where that area is. We're going to look through the ERG. We're going to start looking at critical infrastructure. Gary, to your point, that's in that radius. We're going to look at social vulnerabilities. So if we are going to look at evacuations, we might need to provide transportation and other services to folks who might not have those resources to get out. So our mission in the EOC is to support you guys on the incident. And you certainly don't need to be worried about mass care issues. That's going to be for us to take on, and our friends from Human Services and the Red Cross and others who can focus on that entire other operational element of this disaster. But that's what we would be doing, is start leaning in that direction to anticipate evacuations and everything else. So Nick and Mike and I, we had this conversation yesterday. They do plume modeling. How are we going to get that information in the EOC, or you guys who might want that situational awareness as well? Our common operational picture for a while now has been the Homeland Security Information Network. And so, you know, Nick might be on the scene and he's going to take a screenshot of their plume model and send that to us, and we will put that up there for everybody else. And Diane's going to start using that information with Daniel to kind of ping that off of Everbridge, so we can start looking at those areas where we might send a blast message of evacuations, if we haven't done that already. Because I want to be clear, if Diane gets a call from 911 that there is a placard with a major toxic chemical being released, we're not going to wait for anybody. We're going to send out a blast message then and there using the wireless emergency alert, telling folks to either evacuate or shelter in place. And then we'll start notifying folks. But life safety is number one priority. We're going to make those notifications, even if it doesn't reach to that level that we thought it might. We're going to err on the side of safety. We were talking yesterday about the availability of a program called Chem Responder Network. That's something that we're looking to pursue and learn more about, and maybe get a demo. Our friends from DEQ or VDEM, I don't know if you've heard of this program or if you had anything. Okay. So we can take those tier 2 reports, we can inventory them in this program. We can do modeling based on you know, different aspects of the weather, what the chemicals, stuff like that. So when we set up a demo, we'll send you guys an invite to participate virtually. And there's also this modeling capability from the federal government. And I thought this was fascinating, again, because whether you're, you know, a populated locality with resources like us or a small rural town, you have these federal agencies who can assist with modeling and provide you the information. So by activating them, by calling that number, they can give you what they think, you know, from modeling the way the chemical is going to, you know, be transported through the wind, through water, whatever else, information that you can use to determine where you should have your command post set up, where you want to do sheltering, and all kinds of things like that. So that's another resource. We're going to try to get a demo, and for those who are interested, we'll invite you guys to that as well. So these are 2 alerts from a recent incident in Ohio, where, again, so they sent out a message for shelter in place. And then they talked about where a shelter is going to be. Because, again, you want to evacuate folks who aren't in the plume and tell those folks that are in that plume to shelter in place. I wanted to make note that this is in February in Ohio, right? So it's going to be pretty cold, and people are going to have a place to go. And at the same time, it's close to 10 o'clock at night, which, again, validates what Mike was saying about toxic chemicals being transported during the nighttime. That's one of the challenges, is who's going to get this message. So again, wireless emergency alert is what Diane and Daniel would use, because that's that funky vibration or ringtone on your phone, right? It's meant to wake you up, so you don't have to get the emergency alert system on your TV or anything else like that. You should get the alert with some actionable message telling you exactly what to do with clarity. At the same time, Kelly, we'll talk about activating the emergency page with you know, an explanation of what does evacuation, you know, or shelter in place look like and stuff like that. Now, with Norfolk Alert, we would ask folks to subscribe to that, not just subscribe to our system, but for those who are familiar with, you know, how we do Harbor Fest and Pride Fest and all those other things, we have a keyword opt-in. So if we had a rail incident and we already sent out a wireless emergency alert to evacuate or shelter, life-saving messages, every other incident-related message would go out through Norfolk Alert, and we would ask folks to text the word train or whatever it is to 888-777, and then those folks would be on a list to get updates and so forth. One thing about wireless emergency alert is also we could set a time limit, So if we wanted people to stay outside of the area, and especially for PD who's trying to secure that perimeter, anyone entering that area after that message had gone out would still get the message on their phone once they enter that area. Diane, do you want to speak any more about that?
Yes. So once they go in and then come out, once their device registers that they've received the WIA alert, you will not get it again. So that's the point of having it for a very long duration, is to make sure that we're capturing anybody that may automatically walk into that particular thing.
So one of the things that we noticed from the Facebook messages in East Palestine were the evacuation message went out, or it was being enforced when people were already at work. And so they either had kids or pets or whatever at home, but they weren't able to get to them. But it struck that idea of, well, we may have sent out a message to a specific geographic area, and these folks may not have gotten it because they were at work, but once they enter that area, then they would in fact get that message and would know exactly why the police officers are out there protecting folks from getting into a particular area. So the JIG, again, to me, the biggest lesson learned from all of it is information. Frequent, often, accessible, everything. I mean, letting the media have as much information as they can, in a safe distance on scene, but also in the Joint Information Center, because if you can't answer people's questions fast enough, they're going to come up with their own, thoughts on how things are or aren't going. So whatever we can do to establish a unified message, and then get it out there for everyone, that was crucial.
I have a question before you go on.
Yeah.
With shelter in place versus evacuation, how is that decision made and who makes that decision?
Well, so I would be looking to fire rescue to tell me, based on their plume models, these are the areas that they would want to evacuate, and this is the areas that they would want folks to shelter in place. That's how I see it. Now, going back to what I said about a 911 call, then we would probably just do a 360 perimeter telling folks to shelter in place until further notice.
When you get into shelter in place, it's a sticky situation, if that's the right terminology to use. Because you really have to consider what the duration of the event.
Right.
If you have an event that's going to pass over you and is moving and is going to be there for a finite amount of time, shelter in place is probably good. If you have an event where it's an ongoing long duration event, you have multiple air changes in your home and so forth, sheltering in place may not be a good choice.
Okay.
And anything that has to do with the health of the general public, the health department has a huge role in making those decisions, well beyond what the fire department has.
Okay.
It should be in conjunction with, but if you look in the state plan, the health department has a great big role in shelter in place, evacuation, what standards are safe for the general public to return, things like that.
Right. Okay. Eve, do you have anything to respond to that? I mean, I know you're not the rad expert or the chemical expert, but being the representative from VDH.
There would be a lot of conversations going on, because if you evacuate people, a large number of people, you have to have someplace to put them.
Right.
And it would have to be adequate. You have to take into consideration things like children. How are they going to get to school? How are you going to keep them going? How are you going to feed people? Their pets, you can't leave them behind. People are not going to leave without their pets. You cannot force or bully people to leave behind their animals. You will have a PR nightmare. It's also not the conscionable thing to do. You have all these factors to take into consideration. So it's going to be a lot of people around that table talking about this to figure out, can we have these folks just shelter in place, or do we really, really need to evacuate these folks? And then it's going to come down to, who do we really, really need to evacuate?
Mm-hmm.
There could be people that, have a lot of medical needs going on. What are we going to do with that? We can't just put them in a shelter. We've got to find, can we put them in a nursing home temporarily, or an assisted living facility, so that it's This is probably been a bigger deal than when the storm came through.
Sure, okay. I mean, as I'm trying to think this through, I'm anticipating a sense of urgency, right, to get these folks out for life safety. And so while we may tell them to evacuate, you know, we will get back to them as far as where it's gonna be, because we may not have a shelter site identified at 10 o'clock at night yet when the incident happens, but we would be working on that. But if it's for their life safety, you know, get out of the area, then that's probably what we're gonna tell them. I'm trying to figure out where, so would this conversation take place in the EOC in support of the incident? Or how do you see that playing out?
It would probably be at the USC in support of the incident, but like I said, this is, you know, it obviously, if it's something like red, you gotta get them out of there.
Right.
You know, the whole time exposure distance thing. But if it's something where they can shelter in place, as it evolves and you get more information, you realize, okay, they can't keep sheltering in place because this is getting bigger. There's gonna be a cleanup. We need to get them out of there. That gives you some time to develop a message, talk to them, get things in place.
Okay.
So it depends on the incident. You know, some of them, you're gonna have to move people, put them in a temporary staging area, and then start finding places for them. You know, I guess probably a local incident that happened similar to that was when they had the fire in Chesapeake in the 55 and older apartment complex, the lightning strike.
Okay.
It
Oh, yeah,
went
yeah,
through
yeah.
the roof, and they had all those 55 and older and some folks with different physical needs that now suddenly had to find homes for them.
Right.
And how they kind of, you know, had to find an immediate shelter for them, and then get people to hotel rooms, and then help all these folks find new apartments, because a lot of them were on limited income. It was a very long, drawn-out process.
Okay.
Overall. It would probably be something similar to that.
Okay. Okay.
And state health department has a doctor, and I don't remember if he's an industrial hygienist or a toxicologist, but it's a doctor level person that when you call and say, hey, I have mental ethyl death and we need to know what to do. That individual has the background and the understanding to look at the numbers, look at the data, and help figure out what the best course of action is for the general public.
Okay. Cool. Good.
Are we gonna post stuff on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and who's gonna post it?
Yes.
So
Who?
that's the Joint Information Center. To your point about the shelter in place versus, you know, are we evacuating? How do we get this information out? I think one of the things that we saw with this incident in Ohio, we got to go off what we know at the moment. So we get that initial, yes, there's been this incident. We call it a holding statement. So it gets the information out as quickly as we have it, and it's the bare minimum. But if that means for the time being, we're telling you to shelter in place because we don't know what we're looking at, we're going to tell you to shelter in place. But at the same time, as we're getting the additional information, that's when that constant information and the updates are critical. So if it's, we can no longer have you shelter in place, we need this radius out, this is what we're going to do, we get that message out. But that holding statement is going to tell you where to go for the additional information. And we're going to direct them to the city. It goes to our Twitter account. That is where we're going to continue to update on a constant basis, whether that's, okay, 5 minutes ago, we said this, now we're going to have to tell you, no, it's this. And we will say, you know, it's an evolving situation. Stay here, we're going to continue to update. And this is where our media follows us too. It's a lot easier for us to update that platform rather than trying to get media here, there, and beyond.
So Twitter is the preferred.
I think Twitter is just one of a variety of
We will
platforms.
post to the other places, but Twitter is our go-to. And it's added into our holding statement that for all updates, Twitter is our, and we link it. And that way people know exactly where to go.
So if I was to go to my, financial institutions and tell the financial personnel, Twitter, You know,
Yeah, and we'll state it, so if we are including our Facebook page too, and our website, we link everything, and we make sure that it's linked there, so that we don't have somebody Google searching for it and finding Norfolk, Nebraska.
that was my next.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, we link them.
Now, we have something called the Ellis James Rule, right? Ellis James is a citizen of Norfolk who, for whom I have the utmost respect. And he is very civic minded, attends so many of our council meetings and other meetings, but he does not have access to the internet, right? So he requests copies of council minutes and agendas. I mean, all those things. So just being cognizant of people out there who have no access or even idea what Twitter is, I would just be making the request that we also put things out on TV 48, just continuously, on a loop there as well for folks who don't have access
So
to terminology.
that is an issue though, TV 48 is not something that we can update that to.
Oh, okay. But, and
TV 46 on the other hand, we can, so we can
Okay.
direct from the TV.
cool, okay, so TV 46, and I know in the past we had an agreement with Cox who could put out information, so I'll follow up on that. I don't think we've ever talked about that, but years ago, I think we had something with Cox, so.
Yeah, we were just talking that we can also use EAS in this
Yes.
situation as well.
Yes,
So that would cover the folks that were watching TV, no matter what channel they were on, where to go to find information as it pertains to the incident.
Yeah. Thank you. Now, so just putting out facts isn't going to be enough. Like we said earlier, people can kind of fathom what a hurricane or a tornado is, but chemicals is something totally different. And so there's a really good book. If you've never read it, The Science of Fear, it really breaks down the psychology of how we receive messages and determine whether we're going to take action or not. So he breaks it down to your gut or your brain. And we see a lot of gut responses play out, but I think however we can craft messages in a meaningful way that will make people, that will help people make good decisions based on information versus gut instinct. It's not an easy thing to do by any means, but however we can do that, I think we'll be a lot better off. So, and again, I think it's just, yeah, go ahead.
And Halima will kill me, but Norfolk Cares is the other one that we will send information to. So if we do have, say, the Ellis James situation, a lot of our elderly will call Norfolk Cares when they have questions. So she gets looped in by I mean Halima Akar, she's the Norfolk Cares manager. She will get looped into these conversations very quickly. And as the information comes out, we send out to her and her team so that when those calls are coming in, because if they're not calling 911, they're calling Norfolk Cares, so that they have the information as quickly as well.
Thank you, Kelly. And 211 Virginia, I think is a resource that we could tap. And I think, unless anyone tells me differently, I think 211 is 24/7, unlike Norfolk Cares. So we may engage them early. Either way, they're both going to be.
I'm gonna say, even though Norfolk Cares does have 4 p.m. usually they're shut off Monday through Friday, if an incident like this comes on, she's put online pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So she gets looped into the Joint Information Center almost as quickly as the rest of us.
I think too, it's important to say that we will be the authoritative source for information. I have no doubt the responsible party will probably establish a hotline. I can tell you that there's going to be trust issues and there's going to be questions as far as what the responsible party is telling people. So I took a step back and I started looking at this incident just like we would an active threat. If something happened, PD's in charge, period. The responsible party or the facility where the active threat is taking place, they may be supportive, they may help with coordination, but they have a back seat to what police is doing. I see this being no different. You guys are going to be in charge of the incident, and the responsible party can relay information, but we're not going to send people to the responsible party's hotline. We're going to send them to what we know to be true.
Yeah, residents are not going to be calling, you guys or the responsible party or anybody else. They're going to be calling the city. They're going to be expecting the city to answer, and rightfully so. I mean, they're our residents, so we're here to help them as much as possible. So, yeah, that's kind of the way I see it too.
Cool. Now,
Jim?
yes.
If you don't mind, we've got a good conversation. Well, Kim Lisanter, when speaking of evacuations, he said that concerning evacuations, that she would like everyone to be mindful of hospitals and nursing homes around that area as well. And then she brought up a great point that if air quality is a concern and the facilities themselves have a self-contained air quality system, they might be able to sustain themselves in that facility for a little bit of time, buying some time there. And then she said also spills resulting in water quality can be of concern to the same facilities. And then she brings up an incident that occurred recently in one of our cities to where a water main break caused the hospital to start having to boil water.
Gotcha. Okay.
She wanted to bring that up.
Awesome. Thank you, Kim. All right. So for those who aren't familiar with what shelter in place is, Ray, I think you touched on this. I mean, I don't even know how you say this in a way that some of our elderly population can fathom, other than you turn off your air to try to prevent that airflow into your home, business, or whatever it is. So having an infographic on the emergency site, I think, is going to be huge. And then again, just trying to figure out a way that we can quickly and succinctly tell folks what shelter in place is. I've been to civic leagues where I asked folks what shelter in place meant to them, and they said, well, it means you go to a shelter. And so there's obviously a disconnect. So making sure that folks have at least a basic understanding of what shelter in place means, I think is going to be huge.
So can I add one thing to that?
Yeah.
So we always talk about turning off the air system.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, but for the folks in this room, and maybe you can share this with the people that you are associated with, that is a neutral pressure system. It takes the same air and sucks it around and around and around in a loop through the ductwork in your house. Where you get a bigger problem is the exhaust fans, whether it be the bathroom fans, the thing over the stove, that creates a negative pressure in your house because it's pushing air out and it pulls the outside air in, and nobody ever communicates about that. And if you start to get a stinky chemical in your house, what is your first thing you're gonna do? I'm gonna turn on the bathroom fan because it stinks, and you're just gonna pull more in.
Okay. I'm glad you're here, Greg. I know that. We'll definitely make sure that that's communicated as well. One of the things that we saw them do in Ohio, the residents kept asking for information from field tests and the like. So the quicker we can get something like this up, so folks know every step of the way, what DEQ is seeing, what VDEM's seeing, fire rescue, EPA, which would be shared in that unified command, the better. Now whoops, go ahead.
This brings up a tabletop exercise we did with the Coast Guard, shipyard a while back. When we're talking about this sort of stuff, you all understand it, our residents don't. So we need it as basic can get. So in the case with the shipyard, we were talking, radioactivity levels that amounted to the same that you would see off of a banana.
Contextual statements. Yeah.
You put it to something like that and I'm going, okay, I got, a bunch of bananas in my kitchen right now, I'm fine. It's, dumbing it down for lack of a better way of saying it, but we really need to make sure that if we do put numbers and stats and, all that sort of stuff out, that we're doing a base level that my second grader could understand.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, that's a really great point, because that's one of the things that our communications division tries to push for. The alternative to that, though, is that when you have folks that are, backseat quarterbacking and are experts that are then on social media that are picking apart, how you kind of make that information very accessible, and then they want the technical version of that. They want all the nitty-gritty details. So it's like a balancing act.
Gotcha.
It's really difficult sometimes to decide, is this something that we want to share all the technical details, or is this something that we need to make accessible to everybody?
So I think for something like that, my suggestion would be if somebody wants technical stuff, let's put that on a web page somewhere and direct them over there. But as far as our general populace is concerned, they're not going to be involved in any of that. And in a situation like this, those few outliers really are not my concern. My general population is, and I want to make sure they understand what we're talking about. So if we can put it on a web page and be like, hey, if you want the, details, you really want to get into the nitty gritty of everything, go over here. But as far as our general population is concerned, this is what you need to know.
Cheryl said pictures with it would be great as well.
So Cheryl and I think are on the same page on that, because I was thinking like a dashboard, like we see in our car. I mean, we're in the green right now, but orange is this and red, to me, would communicate better than numbers and stats of danger levels.
Visuals for sure.
Yeah, and so, I mean, I saw that they had 21 air monitoring stations. I think it would be helpful to also give the results of those air monitoring stations, because people are gonna wanna know. And if we're not telling them, they're gonna wonder, well, why aren't you telling us, and stuff like that. So, but you see that they did have a hotline up there, and they had that responsible party had a website. Again, we could link to their stuff, but
Yeah,
we're
I
sending
think
them.
by this time, we've established a page on our, Norfolk.gov. We've got the alert bar up, all of that. So we're directing folks to a page that will have the FAQs. We'll, throw that information in there as well. But that way it also gives us that spot to put all of the additional information. And then the great thing about our team is that we do have webmasters who are able to go in. So as soon as something's being updated to the JIC, it's getting over to them. They're updating that. We've got our social media managers over here. They're managing that. And we're able to get all the information out at the same time.
Nice, thanks, Kevin. All right, so, I don't necessarily, well, this is just to indicate that within 1 mile of all the railroad track that we have in Norfolk, there's over 60,000 facilities, whether residential, business, or otherwise. Yesterday in our planning meeting, I was thinking, wow, 61,000 facilities times 2.55 people, that's gonna be a lot of people to shelter, but no, that's the entire distance of rail that we have. And assuming we're only looking at 1 mile of that section, it's gonna be a lot less than that. But hazardous material incident is in our mitigation plan, and it kind of gives us some of that background information on which we can use to plan for our response. There's a huge component of mass care, and that, like Scott said, that'll be the topic of next week's discussion. So we're just focused on the incident response now. So that first construct of a federal response is, fire rescue, VDEM, DEQ, and police responding to the incident, handling it, we're good. The next level is the National Contingency Plan Unified Command, where there is going to be someone from the Coast Guard on scene and probably the APA providing that oversight. It also mentioned whatever special teams may be here, state, local, territory, still here, as well as the responsible party. And then the Department of Justice and the FBI for that nexus of terrorism. But as reading through the plan, it says that the incident command system is going to be used. So being an ICS 300 and 400 instructor, I threw the branches on there just to symbolize that we would all be working through unified command with one planning section, logistics section, operations, and finance, going through the planning P every operational period. So we're always able to work together and anticipate issues, to determine how effective our response is, and always trying to figure out what we're going to do that next 34 or 48, 72 hours, that next operational period. But the National Contingency Plan is in action, that federal response plan. As you can see, those on the bottom are a lot of the agencies from various levels who could be responding at this level. And so a big question to me would be interoperable communications. How are we going to work and talk with each other? There are some of you in the room who might be familiar with the Orion system, the overlay regional interoperable network. If you don't have a radio with Orion on it, there's 2 regional caches of radios that we can get and deploy. But right now, that's the best idea, I think, that we have when all of these agencies are coming together from either tactical or just coordinating communications. Hopefully that's making sense. I mean, because I don't know how else that we would do that. But you guys would be taking a greater role, VDEM and DEQ, especially with the Coast Guard and the EPA. I mean, I know our folks are going to be still working on containment and putting the stuff out and transporting patients. Ray, has your focus changed at all at this elevated, more complex incident?
We're still focused on the incident itself.
Okay.
Stabilizing, getting containment of it, and then DEQ and VDEM work together, where VDEM does the emergency phase of it, And then it's not a gray area, but it's a transition area where, and it's not the DEQ's not there.
Right.
They're in a support role. Once we get our arms around it and get it stabilized, it slowly but surely becomes more of a remediation effort where DEQ has the 51% vote and we are in support of that. The other thing I'd like to mention here is whether you want to have them or not, the responsible party is going to be a part of this whole event. And with the Coast Guard as the federal on-scene coordinator, they come from the maritime world. And anytime you have an incident aboard a vessel, the first thing the Coast Guard is going to ask the captain of that vessel is, what are you going to do to fix this? Not how can we help you?
Right.
Where is your salver? Where are your cleanup crews? Where is your OSRO? And how are you going to fix this? And you'll see the same thing from the railroad. And the railroad comes with a lot of people, a lot of money, and a lot of resources. And quite frankly, there is no local, state, or federal entity that can do what the railroad and people like HEPACO and the company that did the vent and burn with the explosives. There is nothing in the government sphere that can make that happen. That's all private industry coming. And they're working under a unified command. They're working for the incident commander, but it is outside of the government itself
Okay.
that a lot of that happens. So you're gonna see that.
Gotcha. That's a good point. Thanks, Ray. Now, DEQ, I mean, I think we all have a general idea of what it is that your mission is, right? Environmental quality. Do you want to take a second to kind of share what your focus would be at the onset of the incident and as it kind of progresses to that phase that Ray had mentioned?
So a lot of our focus would be, like Ray touched on, is the responsible party, kind of, what is your plan? Who are you going to contract with to clean this up?
Okay.
At the federal level, they've got room to open up the fund and do things there. The state level, there's some room, but our primary focus and why we're coordinators is to coordinate with them to get them on track, get them motivated, and vet their plan and see what, long-term that's gonna look like, what those remediation needs look like.
Gotcha. I have a sneaking suspicion they will have loving encouragement from a lot of folks, our elected officials as well. They have a good way of encouraging folks. And just, again, watching this play out, I mean, other elected officials at other levels are probably going to take the task, the responsible party. I have no doubt they'll want to be involved in some way. I think from an authority standpoint, I think it's going to rest with the incident command and the unified command. But point well taken that they're the ones that have the resources to respond. Now, Eve, we kind of looked at the public health to answer the question about evacuation. I guess I should have given you the floor to talk about what other concerns or issues that you might be, looking at or anticipating for a larger scale event that really continues to kind of expand. Or not put you on the spot and
Well, I think that it continues to expand. It once again comes down to, and if you have to remove people from their homes, where are they going to go? Where are we going to put them? We start looking at, as I said before, disrupting kids from school. Are we just, what kind of infrastructure are we disrupting? Do we have any kind of healthcare facilities in that area? Do we have a hospital? Do we have a dialysis center? Do we have a long-term care facility or an assisted living facility? What are we going to do with those places? What are we going to do with the folks that live there or use those services? Where are we going to find new housing for people if we have to move them?
Yeah.
And so it becomes, that's kind of that population health piece of public health. And then you start overlapping with some other services, human services and things like that. Housing and redevelopment. It becomes that big picture. Healthcare, we start to lose healthcare if we lose facility. Who's going to be picking that up?
Yeah.
So that kind of becomes a lot of the public health big picture.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. And going through I'll just say reviewing other incidents, there were locations for shelters, but then the location for assistance services were in a different location altogether. And I think we can do it in such a way where the assistance services are brought to the folks at the shelter.
You have to do that. Norfolk, we already know has a transportation problem. We know
Right.
that people do not have their own private transportation. They rely on public transportation and yeah, we're going to put a shelter on the bus route.
Right. Okay. And Gary, I think along those similar lines, our critical infrastructure partners, our city departments, who might be in that impact area are going to have to refer to their continuity of operations plan to figure out where or for how long they can continue their essential services in a different location and what that looks like. Like I said, hopefully it won't be a long thing. Maybe it's 24, 48 hours or whatever. But if it's a longer term thing, certainly that's got to be discussed as well.
We also have to look at if it goes long term. A lot of our shelters are based in schools or, out of rec centers that schools use during the school year. So that will cause disruption throughout schools and the school system because you're not going to have the shelter within the evacuation zone. So you're going to be automatically putting people into a shelter that's outside that area. So you'd be losing a lot of resources utilized by schools.
Oh, absolutely. I think we'll have to be creative with where we put folks. And it might not be one big shelter. It might have to be broken up into different facilities. Gary?
This process that we're discussing for Norfolk, if I was to talk to Tops at the beach, if I was talking to Rob out in Chesapeake, is this the same? Does the process work the same in Chesapeake, Virginia Beach, Norfolk, Portsmouth?
I would like, well, I mean, yeah, they're going to respond the same in whatever locality.
Back end process and who's going to send the messages and who's going to put stuff on Twitter, is that the same?
I can't really speak to other departments and other cities. I know Virginia Beach has a very robust communications department, so for them, it would probably be about the same as how we do it. I can't speak to Chesapeake. I don't know the size of their operation over there, in the comms department. So I don't know how many people they have to help manage their various platforms. Whereas we're set up pretty well that we can have multiple people and multiple platforms at the same time and updating everything at the same time.
So a good way.
Probably deserving of the question of Tops and Rob and those guys, how this process works. I mean, Town Bank has branches all over the place. So I could give them a one-page thing. Here's how we do it in Norfolk. Here's how we do it in Chesapeake. Here's how we do it in Virginia. That's what I'm after.
I think the message should be that it's going to look different everywhere, depending on the resources that the locality has. Yeah. So, I mean, Chesapeake and Virginia Beach are both pretty well resourced. Now, again, the only thing that could add to the complexity is if their EOC or JIC area that they're assigned is also in the impact area, but then you just relocate somewhere else, and work is what you do, not where you do it. But yeah, it's going to look differently, and we pretty much operate, I think, for the same.
Thank you.
I will say that the positive that came out of COVID is how much we're able to do remotely, and that goes across the board, since everybody shut down for as long as we did. So I know for us, like, we can instantly go from wherever we need to be and not miss a beat. And that's, I guess, the positive that came out of COVID, that we're able to remote in. We have that isn't excess, all of that sort of stuff. We're able to just pick up and go.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Gary.
The question business continuity planners that work in the financial institutions are going to ask, is there a consistent process or if it's unique by jurisdiction? Can I get something to give to those people that live and work in those jurisdictions? So they would know what the process is, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, here we post our plans online. I mean, so once this is all up to date and everyone's had an opportunity to see it, it'll be online for everyone to see it. One other issue that we observed in other incidents is that businesses from out of the area were promoting specials for the residents that were in that area. And meat comes to mind. There was a meat special, and I mean, it wasn't contaminated meat. Let me just say that. But it was, for the residents, it was gonna be this amount per pound versus what it usually is and stuff like that. And the response was, well, what about the businesses that are impacted who also provide services and how we were able to promote them over, well-intended businesses, but they're just not from this area. How do we promote and help our businesses to get back up on their feet who are otherwise impacted? And so when we get to the recovery part on another day, there is assistance available for loss of revenue for businesses. There's, assistance for individuals outside of litigation. So trying to figure out what's available to whom under which scenario or conditions is something that we plan on having. So again, we have that ready to go in the assistance center. So anything else? We can see right away. There's going to be a lot of folks coming. And it could potentially involve the port. It could potentially involve the military. There's one of the acronyms up there, SONS, is a spill of national significance. And if you can imagine the economic impact, if the port's not operational, that's going to be an issue. And like we were talking yesterday, the military, and us not always knowing what's on what's always being transported, it can bring some sadness if it's not effectively managed. NTSB, we put that up there because NTSB does the investigation for rail incidents. So again, using the incident command is what we are supposed to be doing, that we formally adopted as a locality, and it's in the plans for the federal and state level. So that's how we would ideally be operating. Now, Ray, you had mentioned how the Coast Guard operates, in the maritime environment and would likely be the same on this. So again, this level, they are actively engaged. Is that kind of how you see them operate in terms of, look, during this period, this operational period, we expect you, the responsible party, to have this, and this done, and then just kind of provide oversight, or are they more hands-on, or how?
I don't want to speak for the Coast Guard, but they're probably not hands-on because they just don't have the tools and resources to be hands-on. They're going to give oversight. DEQ, if you have anything contrary to that, just speak up.
Mm-hmm.
But even on an oil spill, the Coast Guard does not have oil spill response capabilities. They have OSROs, oil spill response organizations, spill contractors that are private entities that go and do that.
Okay.
And so they provide oversight, guidance, and some regulatory authority, but you're not going to see Coast Guard people out there dragging boom around on an oil spill.
Okay. That's helpful. And it's not fair for me to ask you to speak on what Coast Guard would be doing, but that insight really helps. And so we determined that the HR safety office will pay for all of this. Oh, I'm sorry.
I step away for 1 minute.
Right. I'm just messing. All right. Are we good with this level? So we've talked through 2 of the 4 constructs at the federal level.
One question.
Yes, sir.
And I'll ask it now because I'll forget if I don't. When you think of all the people that are going to come here and be in unified command, where are you going to host your unified command at?
That's a good question. We could easily use this as the UC, or does it have to be a certain distance from the incident as long as we're able to communicate with the incident command? Or what are your thoughts on that?
On an incident like this, it would need to be a lot bigger.
Okay.
You would have hundreds of people here.
Okay.
And not all of them sit around the unified command table, but just your planning section could be 50, 60 people.
Right.
So,
okay.
And I don't have an answer, just a question.
No, that's good. That's good for us to consider in our logistics. So.
Take it over scope.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Logistics for scope.
Yeah, or slower, but except for parking, or no, that's a good point. I'm glad.
As long as it's not, right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Well,
to raise a point, the event, like we did the tank, Lincoln tank event, that was a what, 3-week long operation?
Yes.
We were able to manage. You're talking about a trade derailment that disrupts the whole city. For once in hopefully my career event that I'm ever going to have to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's important to put that parameter that the event you're describing or we're laying out here is a huge catastrophic months-long event, because we handled that incident there with 10,000 many gallons of potentially contaminated product for, I think it was a 2 or 3 week period operationally, and we used the,
The work bus.
well, yeah, we used the Port Authority.
Yeah, the
their
command bus.
command, and we were able to, but it's like Ray said, the Coast Guard's gonna come in with a bunch of cutters. And there's not gonna be, you're gonna get like 3 people from the Coast Guard for the events that we deal with every once, a month, every month or two, versus a huge catastrophic event like this.
Okay.
So it would be a scope deal that we take over the scope because half the city of Norfolk's been affected by this catastrophic event.
Gotcha. Okay. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, guys. All right. So just bringing in the common operational picture thing again for whether you're in the unified command here or, providing, backup in other facilities. How are we sharing information? And like Mike and I were talking yesterday, that just might be determined at the onset of the incident. And, whether someone says, well, we have WebUC or we have HISN or we have something else, we just decide at that point what it is that we're going to use and start posting information to it. So it's just about documenting and sharing information. Doesn't have to be one system or another. It just has to be the same system that we all have access to use. So this is one thing that we see early and often, right? But I think one of the first slides, talks about the authorities under which we operate. And FEMA doesn't necessarily have any authority in this space until later. So once the incident command or the unified command is determined to bring in emergency support functions, that's when FEMA will get engaged. So when we talk about emergency support functions, we're talking about resources that are outside of that national contingency plan, right? So the national contingency plan talks about all the things that are needed for a chemical response. More is needed. And so that's when the ESFs are implemented. And then through DHS, FEMA would be the lead for the management of those resources. So they would be behind the scenes. They're not going to be out there doing what they do during hurricanes and other natural disasters. They would be assisting agencies who made resource requests of other federal agencies, trying to make sure that that's all efficient and coordinated in an effective manner. Now, some of you might say, what is an ESF? Emergency support functions. So again, like I said at the beginning, we have the National Response Framework. So that is what FEMA uses to respond to disasters. And they are broken down to emergency support functions. ESF 1 is transportation, 2 is communications, 3 is public works and engineering, 4, so you go down 15 federal emergency support functions, and ESF 10 happens to be oil and hazmat. And so you break out that ESF annex for ESF 10, it tells you who the lead agency is, the primary agencies, and then all the different supporting agencies. And it's certainly more than a one-page document, but that's kind of what FEMA is bringing to the table, is the ability to bring those resources outside of the contingency plan space to be brought into this issue. So is everyone familiar with what ESFs are? Okay, because we're kind of broken down the same way here in Norfolk, and certainly in the Commonwealth, although 17 are used. 16 is military affairs, 17 is donations management. But that's kind of how we bring folks together, regardless of level of government. If you share the same function of transportation, then we try to group you together to build relationships and talk about realistic expectations and things like that. So the most complex, the most serious of incidents will involve a Stafford Act. So that's when the president says there is a major disaster or emergency, in which case FEMA is kind of deployed and serves that federal coordinating officer. So in addition to DEQ, in addition to VDEM and the Coast Guard and OSHA, FEMA will be there to help coordinate federal resources along with the state coordinating officer, because there's not going to be a federal coordinating officer without a state coordinating officer. And so it's important to emphasize, though, and I hope it's in here, coordination versus command. So our fire rescue folks and Ray and DQ, those folks who are on the scene are still managing the incident under their authority, and they are doing incident command stuff. And FEMA and the FCO, the SCO, other officials who want to come to the fight, they're all about coordinating and then also managing those emergency support function resources. It will be fascinating, again, as I try to think through this and anticipate issues, I anticipate needs for logistics, for staging areas, for all kinds of things. And in that ever-growing space of 50 or more people, I'm sure those are going to be some of the conversations as we work through that planning P. But the other thing is the joint field office. The joint field office is designed to bring folks from feds, state, local, and all the others together to have these conversations and to plan. But hopefully, as we've discussed, we're doing that already. And so I don't imagine there being a big other than a bigger presence from FEMA and VDEM.
Can I say, for the Stafford Act, I thought hazmats were not covered by that.
Right. Well, so you're right. And it usually, but there are times, just like winter storms usually aren't covered by, but there's always an exception. So winter storms, it has to be within 10% of the record high snowfall of the time. And in here, as long, if the president has the authority to declare a disaster in that area, and we cite it in the plan, so we'll make sure that you get that. But yeah, he can declare for that. He hasn't yet in Ohio.
No, because I thought he could not.
Yep, and he can. And the other thing is that I thought was fascinating is, I mean, the whole issue of posse comitatus and the federal government coming to a locality without the request of a governor, that doesn't matter in this case if a hazmat incident. In fact, really trying to learn as much as even military can be used for law enforcement in these types of incidents, if that's what the incident called for. It's fascinating from a legal standpoint, but we'll make sure that all the legal authorities are spelled out and cited in the plan. So those are the four constructs of a federal response. One being they don't get involved at all. It's handled at the local and state level. The next one, a unified command is established and the national contingency plan is enacted. Then third, you start going with the unified command in addition to the ESFs. And then the fourth being the Stafford Act response. And that is the information on which we base our plan. We list all the different partners, their roles and responsibilities. We have a battle rhythm of what it is we're trying to accomplish at incident plus 30 minutes, incident plus an hour, 2 hours, and then looking down the lines for recovery. Some of the questions I have with recovery, though, is how is it determined when it's safe for folks to get back home? Because I can tell you there's going to be a lot of questions and doubting about, is it really safe for us to go back home? Now, again, that's the head versus the gut, right? In making their decisions. So using East Palestine as an example, what does decontamination look like? Is decontamination of people's properties even an issue in that type of incident? Or how do you determine when it's safe for folks to go back home? And then how can it be effectively communicated? And anyone who wants to answer that, I'd love to hear it.
Talk to the decontamination piece. It is material specific. And once you set it on fire and you have the constituents that result from the fire, again, it's what were those and is there an ability to decon? And the question is there the ability to decontaminate what?
Right.
Maybe hard surfaces, easy day. Carpets, cloth goods, they might all have to go into trash. The health department, I'm sorry to put you on the spot again. The health department has the responsibility with cooperation from some other organizations and agencies at the state and federal level to say at these levels, people can reoccupy.
Okay.
And it would take the hazmat team walking around with handheld air monitors is not the procedure to figure that out. It's taking grab samples of atmosphere in vacuum canisters, sending them to a certified lab like the state lab in Richmond, having certified analysis done on them, and basing your decisions of what is in the atmosphere, what is in the material, or what is not before that happens.
Do you see us having a conversation about masks and N95s, or, you can re-enter so long as you're wearing a mask or anything else like that? Or
not unless it's a particulate hazard.
Okay.
And even if it is a particulate hazard, unless you are wearing a tight-fitting face piece, which is fitted for you, it is ineffective.
Gotcha.
So I don't see that happening.
Awesome. Okay.
Are you
Thanks.
an industrial hygienist?
No.
You talk like one.
Grace is a smart guy.
He is.
He has a lot of
Yeah.
stuff.
You know your stuff.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So Eve, you mentioned public health again. What's your take on recovery, reentry, decontamination and the like?
Much on what he said. I mean, you're gonna have some people who are just gonna insist they're gonna go into their home no matter what. And so that's gonna, once again, it's gonna have to be working through that unified command as to how we want to let people re-enter. Because the last thing we want to do is let those bulls in the china shop in. And then, 10 years later, you're developing a registry of people who are coming down with different illnesses.
Right.
So you have to develop your reentry plan, what are you gonna do? And this is, once again, assuming the worst case scenario.
Right.
For all we know, it could be something that, because the fire burned long enough and hot enough, everything burned off. It could be something like that. You could get lucky, touch wood, if it's something like that. Otherwise, you have to go back to all your data on it. Where's your plume? How far did it go? Where did your particulates fall out? And you have to start going down that plume where your particulates came out and decide how are you going to test? What are you going to be looking for? You have to get permission from people to go into their homes if you're going to go that far. You're going to have to look at the air. You're going to have to look at the soft furnishings. You're going to have to decide what are you going to do if you find something? How are you going to remediate that? Are you going to buy people new furniture, new clothes? Are you going to rip out carpeting and give them new flooring? What if it's something with the drywall where you can't just wash it off? Those are decisions that have to be made. How can we decon these places? Is it something where you could just have a steamer come in and they can just steam clean everything and they're good to go? Those are things that have to be figured out.
So reading through the social media posts in Ohio, there was one vendor, I believe, who was positioning large dumpsters for folks who were taking out their carpet or whatever, which, people were thankful for, but some of the residents questioned, well, why is that on us to do that? The responsible party should be doing that. So I think we need to have that, like you said, that conversation of the expectations, and it wouldn't be fair for the residents to have to do that. But having some kind of professional cleaning, so long as it's safe to do that.
Right, yeah, because I think we would want to come up with those recommendations. This is what needs to be done to clean/decon your home to be able to go back into. It's the residents, and then it also needs to be presented to the these residents with this so that they can get back into their home.
Yeah, well said.
And
Okay.
then, things like, here's how we expect you to go about. That people, like after a hurricane, flooding into the area.
Okay.
Jim, too, I think it's important that we make sure that this information is coming and we make it known that it's coming from the health department, it's coming from DEQ, and not like what we saw with the social post. I think Robert Southern had some third party that they were sending in, or there were rumors flying, I talked to such and such, they were gonna test stuff, but then if I sign this page, they're gonna dissolve themselves,
Mhm.
So making sure that laying it very clearly.
Coming from us, it's gonna be coming from the city of Norfolk because we're the Norfolk Health Department, so we should
Right.
all be working together.
Yeah.
But understanding
And
that
it's that one
this
message.
is guidance
Yeah.
from the health department is key in that message, so that they understand, because you're the trusted one when it
Well,
comes to it.
remember, we're coming off COVID, so be careful down.
Yeah.
So that's why I want to say that it is a group, this is a joint message where you
Yeah.
have a panel of experts that have come together, and this is their joint recommendation.
You guys are saying the same thing. You're exactly right. We're just saying that the responsible party had told folks that they would have people going out to these properties to determine whether it's safe or not.
And there's no trust.
at all.
Responsible party contractor side. That's what I mean by.
Yeah. So you're right. It would be a unified message for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely. Now, but you also mentioned something that I didn't even think about. And Lieutenant Thompson, this might be for you or Kathy Chancellor online, but there were, I think, 50 folks or so in the town who made the determined decision not to evacuate, the deliberate decision not to evacuate. So I'm assuming having them sign something that says that they refused to evacuate, because I can't imagine we can enforce an order. We can't make people leave their properties, but if they try to, when the infomercials come out, did you live in, whatever, and drink the water from, but they chose not to take those protective actions that were given to them, then there's got to be some sort of release somewhere that they would have to sign. How do you see?
Yeah, I don't know, I mean, imagine something like a hurricane when it's evacuation, you can't go in houses and break people out.
Right.
Off you go, but
Okay.
yeah, they stay, they take on that liability.
Is there any documentation in those cases of these addresses chose to stay, or it's just?
Again, until situation arises, we can't get to them.
Okay.
And I know the public messaging is usually like, if you stay, prepare to be on your own for the next 48 hours.
Okay.
So,
Might be something you want to talk to the legal department about. I mean, we know in hospitals, they have a form that if you want to leave and it's against the doctor's, advice, they make you sign it.
Sure.
They're not liable.
Right. Yeah, go ahead,
I
Kathy.
was gonna say, Jim, no, I'm in agreement with everything that everyone has said on that point. I think given the level of unified messaging that will have gone out, having that documentation available on hand, if they do a waiver and say, okay, well, we elected, it was our choice, having that information on hand will certainly help absolve or at least chip away at liability. I think anything else, not having it would be a little bit more detrimental and a tougher hill to climb in terms of making that case. But I mean, again, if we can't go in and force anybody out, it's their choice. It's emphatically their choice that they decided to stay and face the dangers that were broadcast and made known. So I think that you're on point in thinking that having something on hand to show that they made that choice would certainly be beneficial.
Cool. Thanks,
That'd
Kathy.
be like EMS refusal of service or whatever.
Okay.
Would something like that be? Well, the one thing I was thinking about, you can't force somebody to sign something. They're just gonna close the door in your face. But if the officer is wearing a body worn camera and you're staying at the address, I mean, that's date, time stamped and everything.
Right.
But what
You've got that record that you had that contact with that.
So what happens if you have the contact with the officer saying you need to leave? I say, no, I'm not gonna sign anything. But then I go back and talk to my family and I'm like, well, maybe we should leave, right? So we just leave and you don't know we're leaving. So how would that be done?
Oh, as long as you're safe. But I mean,
Right.
I'm just thinking years down the road, from a liability standpoint, if they claim that we did not effectively communicate to them the need to leave, there being some sort of paper trail saying, yes, we did approach you, this conversation was had, and you made the deliberate decision not to go.
At that time.
Right.
We don't know if they made it an hour later.
Well, so that's a good point. And Lieutenant, I mean, we may not know if they chose to leave or not until after the fact.
Not only that, but I think about it too, we're issuing mandatory evacuations because we feel it's unsafe. So why am I gonna put officers in a situation that's unsafe to approach doors? I don't know where people are.
Right.
So I'm not gonna send officers to a house. Are you in there? You have to evacuate. It's for your safety, but I'm here.
Right, yeah.
Well, I
No,
think
that's a good point. We would
Jim,
use.
I was gonna say, oh, okay, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying, yeah, we would use our notification system to reach folks on their wireless devices to evacuate, and Norfolk Alert for that matter. So we would not hope, expect, or otherwise, want anyone to go door to door, to talk to folks.
Well, as the messaging is clear and we're talking about documentation to someone's point a few moments ago about, okay, you can't force anybody to sign a waiver. Sure. But if you do have camera footage, evidence is evidence and documentation is documentation in any form, and we'll take that, right? So, I mean, as long as the messaging is clear, and in terms of the timing, to Daniel's point about, okay, so they wanted to stay, they got scared, and then, or whatever they happened to them, and then they changed their minds. How would we know? Certainly, from a humanitarian perspective, we don't want anyone to be harmed, but having evidence, clear messaging that indicates that they were told and when they were told, and the messaging includes, instructions on any evacuation or if all of that is clearly laid out, all of that touches away and touches upon liability, and at least the extent of it, and any defense that might be available.
Well, thanks, Kathy.
Jim, I know we're getting a little further into it, but if we tell people to evacuate and the city issues an evacuation order for this neighborhoods, we don't want the police going back into that neighborhood, but then somebody's liable for the protection of all that property and everything else that we ask a citizen to leave. So when their house gets broken into or their cars get stolen or whatever, somebody's liable, and it have to be that company, because the police can't watch that area that's supposedly contaminated now. So one or the other.
I mean, that's an interesting perspective.
But the
Yes.
storm,
Yes,
that's happened before.
Mhm.
people file insurance claims.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's, I guess, the primary way to get through that, but that's interesting. Okay. Well, and Kathy mentioned just, the humanity of it. And I guess that's one of the other things that I'm thinking through is, I mean, the people impacted by this incident is going to be scared because they're not going to understand it, or worse, they do understand it and are really going to be scared. The folks with whom we're operating in this unified command environment are probably going to be scared because this is brand new to anything that we've ever responded to. So I guess, again, from a communication standpoint, the whole cheesy, we're going to get through this together, but we do kind of have to lean on each other to get through it. We have to figure out ways to ensure people are comfortable in our environment. Because even for hurricanes, I mean, a lot of folks aren't used to this public safety related environment. But I would just ask at the end, at this conclusion, our fire rescue folks, what are we missing in terms of this incident that you are certainly more familiar with than we are in our planning, and how can we better support your operations? Or going down the line, what have you seen successful elsewhere that we can kind of emulate to make sure, maximum amount of success here in Norfolk? Nick?
So, yes, I think, it's a great plan. As Ray, I hope to back me up on, we exercise it to a much smaller level, multiple times a year. He just completed the regional hazmat drill. So we drill together as all the areas. But at the lower level, I think it's a great plan. As it evolves, obviously it's going to have to grow. But I think the framework of it, again, we exercise that quite frequently. And not to brag, but I think we're pretty good at it, at working with VDM, DEQ, those entities in these smaller incidents, and hopefully it just never rises to the level of any house.
I think, kind of based on our conversation yesterday and Ray and I earlier, I mean, I can only imagine, that EPA and other federal agencies, I mean, they go everywhere, right? And maybe it's not as often they see localities where agencies get along so well. And I think we do have that here, where locality and VDM gets along really well. Heck, police and fire get along really well. So I think should this happen here, they'll see a pretty good use of incident command and us working together. So thank you for that. Mike, anything else to add? Ray, from your level?
The way Ohio, since that's what we're talking about, is structured for hazardous materials response is completely different than the way Virginia is constructed, tiered, and prepared. So I would think that you would have a different outcome here than, and not that it was a horrible outcome there. I can say that what they experienced there was, I'm gonna give you 5 really lousy choices, and you need to pick the least lousy of the really lousy 5 choices to go with. There was no, oh, you should have done this because everything would have been rainbows and sunshine. That option was not on the table after that round.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, good point. And again, they are totally resourced much differently, much less than we are. So no, good point. And again, this is no judgment on anyone, just taking lessons learned. How about DEQ? Anything that we're missing or any things that we should take into account?
No, but one of the things that you guys are talking about is when is it safe to return to a home? And, you know, we do have VDH or the health departments to help us make that decision. And like you said, the goal is for all of us to be in a unified command, making a joint decision, not in a vacuum, and hold as many resources as we can to make those choices. Same thing applies for any environmental concerns as well, since that's, you know, kind of what our regulations put us in that swim lane. So, you know, when you were mentioning, okay, well, what is the threshold for what is safe? Thumbs up or thumbs down? We're dealing with that in an incident right now in Chesapeake. So it's, you know, the question is always, how clean is clean? And that is a really difficult question to answer. And what we've tried to say in the past, there's most of the time, we don't have a background level to compare it to. So we have to try to be reasonable about our approach. So, you know, what we try to say is, as long as it is not causing more environmental harm to conduct the cleanup than it is to allow whatever has occurred to naturally attenuate, then we're gonna aim for more cleanup. So that's one of the things that we kind of think about is if we don't have a background level to compare sample results to, when do we stop? So that's one of the questions that we always get. I think otherwise you kind of hit on a lot of good topics, but also, you know, having a conversation like this today is a huge part of it because we do have such a good working relationship with the localities and the other state agencies, just trying to make those decisions not in a vacuum and being able to justify, maybe, you know, you got 5 lousy decisions, maybe you accidentally did pick the 3 out of 5 instead of the 1 out of the best choice of the option, out of your options, but it's about being able to justify your decision as a group and saying, we all weighed in on this based off of the information that we had at the time. This is the decision that we made, and it was at the time as sound a decision as we could make, and we didn't take it lightly. And having that message communicated kind of staves off a lot of concern.
Gotcha.
To say that, yeah, you did take it seriously and you did take a measured approach. Just trying to have that messaging out there. Messaging was huge.
Yeah. I can only imagine how, I mean, just documentation of those decisions and on what information those decisions were based. I mean, it's going to be huge. So again, that'll be a takeaway from us is making sure that we have scribes in there just trying to document everything throughout. So thank you for that. Eve, how about VDH? Any final thoughts or things that you would like us to make sure is in the plan or are thinking about?
Just one thought I had with this, I think we'll have to have definitely a different, like screening check-in method for those shelters than we do for our normal store shelters. And
Yes.
definitely different messaging, because otherwise it will just have people showing up.
Right.
And so we're gonna wanna make sure that we're just bringing in folks from the affected area. You know, they're gonna obviously be very upset because they've had to leave their homes. We just don't want anybody, you know, showing up.
No, you know what? I'm glad you said that. And they may be more upset if there's a need to go through a decontamination measure before they go into the shelter.
Right, yeah.
In which case they might be stripped naked and provided some sort of, you know, privacy something, but I think the inconvenience is gonna be even more.
Yeah, so we need to have a screening method where we know that these are folks coming from the area that had to leave their home.
Right.
And not just people coming off the street or someone who got, you know, kicked out of their home because their girlfriend's mad at them or something.
Right, yeah, no, good point. Hey, Kim, from Centera, what concerns might you have about the worried well, or people who really haven't been exposed much, but, certainly what they're seeing in the news, they feel like they have to go to the emergency room because they're starting to have, sinus issues?
Well, and so that's going to be a concern with whatever it is. And it's going to be important for us to know from the general public, but also from the responders that are going out, what substances they may have been exposed to. Because another issue we have with, we would be setting up our decon units outside of the facility to decon those folks before bringing them in, because if we bring them in only to find out that they're going to contaminate other patients in the hospital, now we've potentially created a situation where we've got to shut down the whole ED or something like that, because we've brought contaminated people in that have spread the contaminants. So that's going to be an issue with, making sure that as much as we can, we know what we're dealing with before bringing it into our building, because, then we've created, a whole other issue with that. So that's going to kind of be a concern for us initially with, getting as much information as possible as to what, the exposure was. And unfortunately, we're probably not going to have a whole lot of information before those first couple show up. So we do a lot of training with our decon teams to be able to identify, if suddenly we've got a second person or a third person, or now we've got a, 48th person that's walking in with the same symptoms. We're trying to contain that as much as possible, and, deconning those folks as much as we can before bringing them in. And as someone just mentioned, we try to do that in as, much of a, concern for privacy as possible. But the decontamination process by its nature, they're stripped of everything, and, modesty's going out the window at that point. So that kind of becomes a concern too. But and then treating the responders as they come in. So and then the other point that I was kind of making in the chat was that, if you guys are making decisions to evacuate, certain areas, and we've got facilities that are in those evacuation zones, I would be concerned with getting the information as soon as possible that we may have to evacuate, even if you're looking at a 1 mile area, and but we're sitting at, a mile and a half, or, if there's a potential that it could expand, we would like to know as soon as possible so that we can start making arrangements to, get folks moved, or, get on diversion or things like that. So, this is this is quite the nightmare for everybody. And, we, of course, like you guys, want to learn from the lessons up there, so that, if something like that happens here, we're a little bit more prepared. But, definitely a lot of concerns all the way around for sure.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Kim. And just so you go and everyone online and in the room, I mean, we'll do this like we would other incidents, where you guys would be invited to the EOC briefings, whether in person or virtually. And so any plans for, further evacuations would be relayed, or if it's between those EOC briefings, you guys would be notified through Norfolk Alert that that's the direction that we're heading.
Right.
Hopefully before we're giving it to the public, giving you some sort of notice, so you can start planning accordingly.
Right. And one thing that we saw when I was still at the beach, when I don't know if you remember, or I'm sure you do, the fuel spill that affected, and it we had people were going, they were testing the air quality and everything, and it was not above a threshold that was dangerous. But the numbers of people that were complaining about the smell and indicating that it was making them sick, and it was giving them, the symptom or that symptom, you're probably going to be dealing with a lot of messaging around that, as far as, yes, you've determined that the air, it is safe, or it's, below a certain threshold, but people are still going to, if they're smelling it, because I mean, we dealt with that for quite a while, even after everything was, for all intents and purposes cleaned up, but there was still some residual, odor to the air that, and so that some of those folks would, probably be wandering into the hospital as well, and saying, that they're smelling, this or that or the other, and it's giving them this symptom, whether it's a headache or so there's probably going to be a lot of that going on too. So us
Sure.
coordinating with you guys, with messaging around that would be helpful as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ken. Before we go to Kelly for messaging, let me ask Sarah, from the CSB, from the mental health perspective, what might your priorities or concerns be, either immediately or long-term with this type of incident?
Thanks, Jim. So I think we would probably be looking at something similar where we have other CSBs come in to do some, trauma response type of stuff. Because I don't think it would look that much different from, well, it would look scarier, right? But I don't think it would look much different than kind of the intent to be able to have that kind of support once it's identified where, where would be safe to do that. And I think, we probably, if we're looking at some form of casualty, then we would be, of course, supporting the unification center or notification center, whatever that's called. But I think the other piece of that is that we would have to activate, if we were in areas where our facilities were down or dangerous to come to our facilities, we would need to activate our plan like we would do in a hurricane evacuation. Is that how do we get service to our clients? How do we find them? Because we don't have advanced notification that it's happening. We have 6,000 people, 6,000 residents in the city of Norfolk, depending on us for psychiatric care, developmental disabilities care, homeless services, things like that. So there would be a lot for us to do. Mostly, I think our priority would be finding everyone. And then for our DD population, especially people in group homes, to figure out it, because they're all across the region, to figure out who's impacted in what group home, and if we need to assist that group home in finding another placement somewhere else in the state for a while for them to be safe.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what, that's Sarah, that's something that we should definitely have in our planning section to figure out ways that your team could be supported to reach your clients. So no, I'm glad you mentioned.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that, we kind of always put on the tail end, but it doesn't fit nicely in a box, is that to recognize that if people are disrupted, we'll be looking at acute alcohol withdrawal and acute opioid withdrawal for some people, and how we are planning to address those emergencies.
Thanks, Sarah, as always.
Okay, thanks.
Kelly, from a messaging standpoint, are we missing anything, or is there anything that we could do to help your job be better in an incident like this? Or what are your thoughts or concerns?
Shocking that I'm gonna say this, communication is key, and that's internal as well as external. So making sure that we are, when we stand up that JIC, that communication is going both ways. So if we have questions that are coming in, that's part of what we do, is we monitor what we're seeing on social. We're monitoring what calls are coming in from Norfolk Cares. We're monitoring what media is actually putting out. So if we're seeing something and we don't have an answer, and we're trying to get that from Unified Command, it's really helpful if we can get that, and we can get that in a timely manner. And we don't like to be the pests. We know everybody's got a job to do, but that is our job, is to make sure that we don't have those rumors flying around. And the best way to do that is make sure that we're getting that information out, and we're getting it out quickly. We understand though too, that if we're putting information out quickly, there's a good chance that it could be wrong. So if that is the case, we've got to own it and make it right. And that's fine too. Anybody who's been through a situation knows that we're literally living it second by second. So something that you had 5 minutes ago could have been right at the time, or so you thought. Now that we've got a little bit more, boots on the ground, or something has changed, we just need to be able to go in and make that change, and we need to be able to own that. So it's that back and forth and making sure that whatever you're seeing, or whatever you're coming across on scene, that we're getting what information we're allowed to put out, and we're able to put it out quickly.
Thanks, Kelly. I can't remember if we said this at the beginning or not, but part of the plan calls for someone from the JIC as well as someone from the EOC to go to the incident command to assist with relaying information back to the JIC, or back to the EOC for situational awareness and documentation. So when it's a storm, we usually ask folks or departments to to provide any messaging that they want to go out every, sit rep. But I imagine for something like this, it's gonna need to be a lot more frequent, so.
And the other part I think that was really interesting from Ohio is, and I don't know what their bench looked like when it came to their comms people. I'm imagining it's a pretty small
Yeah.
situation. We're pretty deep on our bench now, which is really helpful in being able to go back in and respond to things when appropriate. So hopefully we won't have those situations of things just kind of festering because they're not getting information. We're able to actually have people assigned to the platforms and making sure that we are monitoring and we are updating.
Nice. Thanks, Scott. Anything else for the good of the order?
I'd like to talk about just a couple of things.
Yeah, please.
So when we going back to decon, and this is somewhat in the weeds, but I think it's important to talk about. When people talk about hazmat decontamination, I think a lot of times they think of like long-handled brushes and hoses and tents, all kinds of stuff. For the people leaving the area, it could be as simple as discarding the clothes that they have on, taking a shower, just like you'd take it home, and getting whatever limited amount of stuff is on you, off you. And then, like was said earlier, giving them some kind of garment to put on.
Mm-hmm.
The backside of that is, okay, now what? You're in a paper bag with arms in it. How are we going to clothe these 5,000 people that we now require to be deconned or wear a paper bag?
Right.
So, and again, I don't have an answer, just a question, but that's something to think about. And so it doesn't always have to be this quote hazmat decon. And the last thing I wanted to talk about, and I have no stock ownership in any railroad, I just wanted for this group, because maybe it'll be an education, maybe not, but just why do railroads carry hazardous materials? And to that point, Norfolk Southern, CSX, you pick the railroad, they have no choice as to what hazardous commodities they move on their rail system. They are what's called a common carrier in the federal code. And as long as the material meets DOT requirements by the way it's packaged, they have no option on whether they want to move it or not. The railroad several of the railroads for a long time have been trying to get out of the business of moving anhydrous hydrogen fluoride. That's how bad it is. But as of right now, the regulations say that they have to transport that stuff if it's packaged correctly. The other thing to consider is there's actually 3 responsible parties, most likely, with that event. There's the railroad, there's the tank car company, because the tank car is leased, the railroads don't own tank cars. That's from a third party. And the commodity inside is owned by yet another entity. It's kind of like when you have a pipeline spill from a petroleum pipeline. The pipeline company is the big ugly, but they don't really own the product inside. They're just like the railroad or the trucking company that are moving it from point A to point B. They're a transportation company. And so for whatever that's worth, based on what you've seen in the news and whatnot, just to kind of put it in perspective.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. I think we captured all those, right? Thank you.
This is Kathy. I just wanted, okay.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Kathy.
Well, just, and guys, everybody bear with me, if it sounds stupid or if you've already got it covered somewhere, but someone moments ago raised a point about how would we clothe, 5,000 or so people that had to be evacuated. And certainly the importance of having those partnerships with, and I know we do it because I've seen other meeting notices, either with our church organizations or our charitable organizations. That kind of thing comes in handy, and being able to either provide or underwrite, I don't know, from a financial perspective, families going to those locations just to get clothing. It may not be new, but it beats, what they had on their backs, right? Or had to take off, rather. Just a thought.
No, you're exactly right. I think Ray's comments will be included in next month's conversation, where human services is at the plate instead of on deck today. So yeah, all those human services and just mass carrying needs in general, I think we'll have some pretty good discussion. And to your point, yeah, we have a lot of partners in the faith-based industry as well as other non-governmental organizations. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that all comes together. I think we're at our time. It's 3 o'clock. I will just say congratulations because we just really kind of completed the tabletop exercise. So if you would like documentation of your participation for a tabletop exercise, Eve, or anyone else, let me know and we're happy to write up a certificate of appreciation for that. Anything else for the good of the order? Anything you want to share with the group about this or anything else?
I would just, Ray, I'd like the contact for that doctor you mentioned, for the region that can do what he does.
Eve should know who that is.
Yeah, it was a public thing.
Does he still work for the health department? Dwight Flanagan, he's either a industrial hygienist or toxicologist for the state health department.
I'd have to look him up. I have not heard that name recently.
Okay.
He's still on their website.
Okay.
Right now, just
Okay.
good.
Yep.
Dwight Flamia,
Cool.
FLAMMIA.
Thank you, ma'am. I did neglect to ask anyone online. Anything else that you want to share for the good of the order? All right, hearing none. Thank you, everyone, for your participation, for the conversation. And Tony.
Yep, quick plug for recruitment of 911 telecommunicators. We have 2 positions that probably would be good for this group to get the word out. And I have cards here with QR codes on them. If you know anybody, please pass it to them. This will take them right to the webpage. One is a entry level call taker. Both those positions start at 37.6 and 38.4. And if you need any more information, don't hesitate to contact me or Diane or Stephen, and the cards will be back here.
Thanks, Tony.
Thank you.
Based on the comments, we'll update the plan. We'll send it out to this group as well as a certificate of appreciation for this exercise. Thank you very much and have a good rest of your day. Thanks.
I just want to thank Jim for this great work and presentation. And next month, we're going to have basically part 2 of this incident. So now we've tackled the incident. We know the initial response. We know what's happened. And now we'll be looking at maybe a family assistance center, a sheltering, responsibility, liability for such, opening up the EOC, seeing if DEQ has a representative there, if you need it, and any other resources or any other partners you might want to bring to the EOC. So next month is just a continuation of this month. So thank you all, and thank Jim for this presentation.
Thank you.
It was a good time. It was a good time.
Great. Bring it on.